Good evening and welcome. My name is Ginger Fay and I'm one of the directors here at Appleruth Tutoring Services. We are a tutoring and test prep company and we work with students on a variety of things to help them achieve their goals. It is our pleasure for you to join us this evening and I am delighted to be able to introduce you to a pair of wonderful colleagues from Collegiate Gateway, which is an organization that provides personalized admissions and career counseling services to students at many different stages in their education journey. Collegiate Gateway is led by my dear friend, Julie Raynor Gross, who is a nationally recognized expert in admissions. She has appeared on television and in print. She is often speaking at conferences and sharing her insights on the admissions landscape. She started working in this field independently about 15 years ago and has led countless students to success through lots of different paths in that time. Her own undergraduate degree is from Princeton University, and she holds an MBA from Harvard Business School, as well as a master's in education from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. She is also a certified educational planner. So Julie's going to tell us the ins and outs of everything we need to know about the application process for some of the most popular graduate and professional school programs. And she's joined tonight by her colleague, Caroline Ferrucci, who's going to take us through a pretty exciting part of this process, which is a special raffle tonight for a chance to talk with Julie personally. So I'm so excited that both of you would be willing to join us. We're really looking forward to the conversation tonight and very appreciative of you sharing your time and your resources with us. I want to let everybody who's joining us tonight know that we will be sharing the recording of this conversation with you tomorrow, and we'll also share the slides that Julie is about to present. If you have questions along the way, I hope you will please feel free to put them in the Q&A box. We'd love to be able to tailor the questions and commentary to the things that are most interesting to you as you are beginning this journey. So as the questions occur to you, feel free, please, to pop them into the Q&A box and we will cover as many of them as we can in the next hour. Thank you all so much for joining us. Julie, I'll let you get started.
Thank you, Ginger. I'm delighted to be here. And we are going to start by launching a poll and asking all of our participants to answer a series of questions. So you can use the bar at the right to scroll up and down and answer the questions about whether you are a student or a parent, what grade is the student in, and then what kind of grad school are you interested in? And we'll just take a few moments to give everyone a chance to answer the poll, and that will give us very valuable information.
I feel like we need some like Jeopardy music in here.
Absolutely.
Or something like that. I don't know if anyone wants to write a song real fast. Sting, I don't know if you saw, but Sting wrote a song when he was on Jeopardy recently. He wrote words to accompany the Jeopardy theme song. It's really cute.
We will have to find that for next time. Absolutely. So we encourage everyone to fill out the poll. This is anonymous, and then we will announce the results of the poll. Very exciting. Voter registration is very important, as we all know. So we'll count down for a few seconds for you to complete the poll. 3, 2, 1. And let's see our results. So as you can see, we have 50% of our attendees are students, 36% are parents, and 14% work in a related field. Welcome. And in terms of the grades, there's a nice distribution. We have 21% in high school, then 14% sophomores in college, 21% juniors, and 43%, almost half of our attendees are college graduates, which makes sense. You're right on the verge of planning your future. Is there a particular kind of grad school you're interested in? 21% medical, 7% law, 14% business, 7% psychology, and half master's and PhD programs. Excellent. Thank you very much for that information. And now we will get started. Welcome to our presentation on graduate school admissions, what every student needs to know. I am Julie Raynor Gross, founder and president of Collegiate Gateway. My background is very interdisciplinary. I have extensive grounding in psychology, education, and business. And Collegiate Gateway provides both college and grad school admissions consulting in all fields. In addition to the industry associations for college advising, I belong to associations for grad school advising, which are very specialized. Recently, I attended the virtual conference of NAAHP, the National Association for Advisors to the Health Professions, all about med school. And next week, I will be attending the virtual conference of AGAC, Association of International Graduate Admissions Consultants for Business School Advising. Tonight's agenda is very ambitious. We will cover the universe of grad schools, and we're looking at all different types: medical, law, business, psych, master's and PhD programs. Which grad school is right for you? We'll discuss the importance of identifying your interests, strengths, and preferences. And then how to prepare for grad school in terms of academics, testing, and extracurriculars. What are the application components? The quantitative components, GPA and test scores, and the qualitative, essays, letters of recommendation, and interviews. And we will conclude with sample timelines for applying to different kinds of graduate programs. We are offering a complimentary 60-minute graduate school consulting session with me. And to enter, please send a note in the Q&A section with your first and last name and your email address. And at the end of the presentation, we will announce the winner. So what is the universe of graduate schools that we will be discussing tonight? Medicine, law, business, psychology, which are considered the professional schools. And then we have the graduate schools of master's and PhD programs. How can you identify the right grad school for you? And I receive so many questions from my clients who have multiple interests at the time that they graduate college, and they know that they would like to go to grad school, but they have trouble narrowing down exactly what field. I've dealt with numerous students who were fascinated by both medicine and business, which you could combine with a joint degree. I've had students who wondered if they should pursue an MBA or a master's in international business. So how can you identify the right program for you? Evaluate all of your experiences, interests, strengths, and preferences. First, evaluate your academic experiences. What have you studied? What have you most enjoyed? What projects were particularly meaningful for you? Often, a terrific professor might be extremely instrumental in opening your eyes to a very exciting field. Next, evaluate all of your extracurricular activities, including clubs, internships, employment, shadowing, your clinical experiences, which have had the most impact on you. Finally, consider your interests, strengths, and preferences. A great way to learn about your preferences and strengths is through assessments. I'm a master practitioner of two leading assessments, the MBTI Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, which identifies innate personality preferences and helps you understand how you prefer to interact with people, learn, communicate, work on teams, and the Strong Interest Inventory, which identifies interests in academics, activities, and career paths. The MBTI instrument is based on the psychological theories of Carl Jung and was then translated into a very valid and reliable assessment tool by the mother-daughter team Myers and Briggs. And it indicates preferences on 4 pairs of opposites called dichotomies. And these deal with preferences for how you like to receive energy and stimulation, how you prefer to process information and the information that you trust, how you prefer to make decisions, whether objective or subjective, and your lifestyle preferences. And this all tells you an enormous amount about your preferred ways of looking at the world, of communicating, of managing conflict and stress, dealing with change, and your approach to leadership and teamwork. The Strong Interest Inventory is an assessment tool that uses the vocational psychology constructs of John Holland. And the theory is that there are 6 themes of personality and 6 corresponding themes of interests, and that we are most satisfied when there's an alignment between your personality and your activities or career paths. And the 6 themes are realistic, which deals with the enjoyment of fixing, building, and repairing big machinery, being in the outdoors. Investigative, the love of problem solving and science. Artistic, people motivated by a desire to express their creativity and individuality. Social, not to be confused with extroverted. Social is the interest in helping others, very similar to the work I do, the interest in guiding and empowering other people. Enterprising, interest in persuading people in the realms of business and law. And finally, conventional, the love of organizing information and data, often associated with computers, because that's what we use these days for organization. And there's a powerful intersection between personality and interests, in that research has shown that certain personalities derive the most satisfaction from certain occupations. Now let's talk about preparing for grad school, now that we've discussed how you can identify your academic areas of interest and your preferences and strengths. Your academics will play the largest role. And students often ask me whether certain majors provide a stronger foundation for particular career interests. Medical school is quite unique in that it has a set of about 10 required pre-med courses, but you can major in anything. Traditionally, students thought it would make sense to major in biology because that would overlap with many of the required courses. But med schools actually are valuing diversity more and more, and they're looking to admit students whose major is even outside of the natural sciences. So I have many students I work with who have a major that is related to medicine, but outside of the natural sciences, such as Spanish, public health, nutritional sciences, neuroscience. And you also can just follow your passion, major in anything, even music. Undergraduate years are the time to really follow and delve into the areas that you most enjoy. For law, you also could major in anything as long as you're able to demonstrate strong communication and analytic skills. So often students will major in the humanities or psychology because you deal so much with people in the law. In business, the natural major might be business or economics, but many colleges do not have a business major, and yet over a third of their students go into business after they graduate. As long as you demonstrate very strong analytic skills and you do well in college, you will be well positioned for employment or graduate school. Engineering is unique because typically you would study engineering on an undergraduate level. And all of the STEM, in fact, if you're going to pursue a doctorate in physics, typically you would have done physics on the undergraduate level. Your GPA will be one of the most important factors in your candidacy. And the grades in certain courses will be given more consideration. So again, this is the most true with medical school. Medical school has many GPAs that they look at. For every year of undergraduate studies, you have 3 GPAs. Your science GPA, also known as BCPM GPA, if you can decode that, it's biology, chemistry, physics, and math. And medical school will look very much at the trend all through school because your courses are going to become more rigorous as you go on. And that's true really with all graduate schools. There's often a certain amount of forgiveness or leniency for your freshman year. Everyone knows that there can be an adjustment to moving away from home and getting used to the rigors of freshman year. So it's not only the absolute GPA, but also the trend over your years. And when I say trend, we're looking for an upward trend. Now the role of testing, which plays an enormous role. And we know that that was so severely impacted by COVID in terms of accessibility to testing. So we will examine testing now that is specifically required for each kind of grad school. And let's start with medicine. The MCAT is required universally. For law, the LSAT traditionally was required, but now many schools are allowing the GRE. And similarly, for business, the GMAT was traditional, but more schools are allowing the GRE. And the GRE is the standard test for master's and PhD programs. And in addition to that, there are 1-hour graduate subject tests. So many psychology programs will require the psychology graduate test. So for instance, Yale says that that is optional, but the University of Illinois recommends it, and Minnesota highly recommends it. So now let's go into the testing for each one of the grad schools. And I'm going to walk you through a history of what's happened in terms of the impact of COVID and where we stand now. The MCAT is the standardized test for both the MD program called allopathic and the DO programs, osteopathic. And both degrees enable you to become a practicing physician in any specialty. The MCAT is offered from January through September each year. Due to COVID, there was one additional test date in January of 2021 to accommodate those applying this cycle. And the AAMC, Association of American Medical Colleges, had shortened the MCAT exam to 5 hours, 45 minutes in 2020 in order to increase capacity at the test centers and follow social distancing practices. But now 2021, tests are back to their full length of 7 hours and 15 minutes. And the MCAT test has 4 sections, and the 6 hours 15 is the content, and then you have breaks. I'm fascinated by the fact that in 2016, the MCAT decided to add the section Psychological, Social, and Biological Foundations of Behavior. And I feel that this reflects the increasing emphasis on the importance of considering psychological factors in dealing with patients, as well as the socioeconomic determinants of health. So it was the recognition of the medical education community that we can't only look at a patient's biology and symptoms, we need to look at them in a very holistic way. Each of the 4 sections of the MCAT are scored separately and then added together. So this sample applicant scored 501 out of a possible 528, which is very close to the average score, but not strong enough to be accepted at MD programs. So typically you would need a score of roughly 508 to 510 to even be considered for MD programs. And in the low 500s for DO osteopathic programs. And for this particular applicant, if you look at the confidence band, the range of scores the applicant could have scored is between 499 and 503 in terms of the standard deviation. Schools see all your MCAT scores that are taken. So you can not only submit the scores that you like, either the section scores or the total scores. And most med schools view the scores as an entire picture, like Harvard, Stanford, BU, USC. But some schools only consider your highest composite score. So when we're looking at test scores, we often see a bell-shaped curve in terms of where the test takers fall. So here you see our curve around the mode of 500 to 504. And now we'll turn to the LSAT for people who are looking to apply to law schools. The LSAT is the standardized test for law school admission. However, many law schools are now accepting the GRE in its place because it was so difficult to get access to testing. So in response to COVID, the Law School Admissions Council, LSAC, released the LSAT Flex, which was offered remotely. You could take it at your own computer, and it shortened the LSAT from 4 sections to 3 sections. It took out the experimental section, and there was only one more LSAT Flex. It's the week of June 12th, and then the original LSAT format of 4 sections will resume in August. But it will continue to be offered virtually through June 2022. So COVID has had a monumental effect on so much, and particularly in the graduate school admissions process. And here are the 4 sections of the test. So it's definitely a much more demanding and rigorous test than the SAT and the ACT, especially with the addition of the logical reasoning section. And here are applications by LSAT scores. And once again, we see a bell-shaped distribution, which showing that the mode of LSAT scores is 150 to 154, with very few students scoring above the magic 170, which is considered a very special score for acceptance to top law schools. And there's a similar pattern for the last 6 years. And now we turn to the GMAT, which is the standardized traditional test for business school. Now, a very interesting feature of the GMAT is that it is computer adaptive by question. What does this mean? It selects your next question based on how you answered the previous question. So if you got it right, then you're in line to have a more difficult test that is going to try to really calibrate what your ultimate score is. But if you didn't answer that, then you will not continue on that path of that particular type of question. So it absolutely is a very nuanced way of providing an individualized test. And here are the 4 sections of the GMAT. And the analytical writing has to do with analysis of argument. So here we have the average GMAT scores for selective MBA programs during the period 2015 to 2020. And if we just look at Harvard, for example, we see a steady increase to 730 on an 800 scale. But several of the other schools, like Penn, was fairly stable over time. So these bar graphs tell an amazing story. You can so clearly see the pattern. For instance, Berkeley became significantly more selective over that period of time. And now let's turn to an overview of the GRE, which is the standard test, the broadest test for grad school, and it's for all masters and PhD programs. But as we just saw, there are many business and law schools that are accepting the GRE. Now, this is section level adaptive, so you probably can all guess what that means now, which is that the computer selects the next section based on how you did on the previous section. And these are the topics: verbal reasoning, quantitative reasoning, which is very standard in these exams, and also analytical writing. So here we have information on the average scores of the GRE by the graduate field. And not surprisingly, in verbal reasoning, the scores are highest for students attending grad school in the humanities and arts, law, and social sciences. And quantitative reasoning, the scores are much higher for students attending grad school in engineering and the physical sciences. So what schools are accepting the GRE? Here are selective law schools that accept the GRE. And why would schools allow students to take a less rigorous exam? Part of it is that many schools would like to increase access to admissions. And the GRE does not require as much test prep as the LSAT or the GMAT. In addition, if a student is not decided on the kind of grad school they want, and they're thinking of either law school or perhaps a master's in philosophy, this way they could use the GRE for both. So a lot of it is to increase access, but it also increases the number of students who apply, which in turn increases the selectivity of the school. And here are some selective MBA programs that accept the GRE. But even though all of these schools will say in their policy that they're open to receiving the GRE, informally, I would say that the top programs would still prefer the GMAT because it is more rigorous and more aligned with what you need to study in business school. And now that we've talked about the quantitative component of your life in college in terms of your coursework, your GPA, and your testing, now let's turn to extracurricular activities. And activities in college can be a terrific preparation for grad school and strengthen your candidacy. And I would like to draw the difference between college and grad school in the United States versus everywhere else. And for instance, in England, where I also have students who apply to schools in England and Scotland, and there, if you're applying to college or grad school, all that is relevant is your academic subject of interest and only the extracurricular activities that are relevant to what you're going to study. But in the United States, in both college and grad school, they're very interested in who you are as a person. In grad school, it is more tied to what your field is, but there's a lot of breadth in terms of the kinds of activities that will demonstrate characteristics that will serve you well in your profession. So now let's look at activities specific for different fields. And again, we will start with medicine. So I call it the 4 pillars of medically relevant experience. And when I work with pre-meds in college, I help them identify activities in these 4 areas and how to sequence them so that they accomplish all of this while maintaining a rigorous course load. So clinical experience means patient contact, and that is the number 1 most important activity as a pre-med for your candidacy for medical school. And this could involve volunteer work in hospitals, nursing homes. You could be employed as a physician's assistant in a hospital, a doctor's office, or perform work as a scribe or as an EMT. The next is shadowing physicians, or if you're applying to psychology programs, psychology therapists. And you can shadow doctors in your specialized area of interest, but it's also helpful to shadow a range of doctors for exposure to different fields. And I often receive a question, is it still considered worthwhile and valuable to shadow a parent who is a doctor or who owns a company? Absolutely, because it gives you a bird's eye view that you've grown up with a family member that you have observed. You've observed how they balance their life with their career. So it is always very beneficial if you have a family member, take advantage of that opportunity. And for med school in particular, the med schools want to know that you are familiar with the demands and rigors of the medical profession, which is literally a life and death profession, and that you understand the demands of the training for it, the demands of the long days as a physician. So shadowing is extremely important. Next, research. For all of the top medical schools, it is very important to have conducted a significant amount of research during college. And the two types are bench research, which is in a lab, or clinical research, research directly with people. So the considerations of what kind of research, what are you interested in, and what is the selectivity of your med schools, and how much do they value research? In addition, it is also helpful to be involved with clubs and organizations that suit your interests and that allow you to showcase your empathy, teamwork, and leadership. So for instance, community service plays such an important role in showing your compassion, your desire to help people. Even Greek life involvement and sport shows your ability to contribute to a team. So other activities like being resident advisor and tour guide may provide opportunities for leadership. So figuring out how to balance all of these activities with the pre-med requirements and your major is a very important task. And that's why I typically like to start in freshman year of college to help pre-meds develop a 4-year plan and then continue to reassess it. It's a very different story for extracurricular activities as preparation for law and business school. So there are certain clubs that will definitely sharpen your skills and demonstrate your interest, strengthen your candidacy, but it's not to the intense level that those activities that I just mentioned would be required. It's thousands of hours that is required in order to be a strong candidate for medical school. If you're applying to law school, you could be involved in debate, model UN, student government, you could shadow lawyers, you could work during the summers for a political office or a law firm. So there are definitely things that you can do that would both help you learn about the profession and strengthen your candidacy. And similarly, for business school, you could do a number of internships either during the school year or during the summer. I had a student a few years ago who did pro bono work helping lower income families do their taxes who could not afford an accountant. And I thought that was a fascinating, creative activity that was a great foundation for business school. Now let's turn to the application platforms for different graduate schools. For medical school, there's a clearinghouse. AMCAS is the application platform for the MD programs, and a COMAS for osteopathic DO programs. And the application itself for an MD program is the most complex of any kind of grad school. So it's a long personal statement, 15 activity essays, 3 most meaningful activity essays. However, it is made more manageable by having this clearinghouse. And similarly, for law school, LSAC is the platform for law school applications. For psychology, PsyCAS is used by some psychology graduate schools, but other psychology grad schools and all business schools, engineering, other grad programs of master's and PhD, every single program uses its own application and has its own unique essays. So it's a strategic challenge to figure out a great sequence for how to answer all of these essays. You may end up with 30 or 40 distinct essays, and how to answer them strongly and authentically for each of the programs. And even though medical school has the platform, the medical schools do send you a secondary application that has between 1 and 7 additional essays, and that's how they customize their application. So we've now discussed the quantitative components of GPA and testing that you will accomplish during college or afterwards. And now let's turn to the qualitative aspects that will boost your candidacy. Essays are so critical and take a ton of good thought, good writing, good editing. I spend considerable time with my students brainstorming topics to discuss and refining the essay to reach the most authentic and powerful representation of them possible. There's a very big difference between college essays and graduate school essays. For grad school, they expect that you have much more of a knowledge about your academic and career interests, and you need to be very specific in identifying that. But I do believe that all essays for both college and grad school should be creative and engaging. The most common essays that are required for graduate programs are called statement of purpose and personal statement. And what is the difference between these essays? Overall, the statement of purpose is more specific, technical, research-based, goals-focused, and forward-thinking. And you need to talk about research you've conducted, research you're interested in conducting, and identify several professors that you would like to work with. The personal statement, as it says, is more personal, more autobiographical, broader in scope, very much like telling a story, and more retrospective. And it is sometimes said that the personal statement looks back and the statement of purpose looks ahead. So medical, law, and business schools typically have only the personal statement, but master's and PhD programs, including psychology, also may ask for a statement of purpose or combine them. Letters of recommendation are so important in rounding out the portrait of who you are and having someone else describe you besides yourself. So for different programs, there are different requirements. For example, for medical school, for an MD program, you can identify 10 different recommenders, and then each medical school will tell you its requirements. Often you could identify up to 6 for a particular med school, and often the school will say if they want either 1 or 2 from science faculty. And for business and law school, often you're restricted to 2 or 3 recommenders. Interview policies vary depending on the type of grad school that you're applying to. And some schools offer interviews on a limited basis, usually by invitation only. If you are offered an interview, I suggest you take it. Those that offer interviews make them an important part of the admissions decision. I occasionally have a student who says that they're very shy and they would rather not interview. And I explain that I conduct mock interviews with extensive feedback and that interviewing is a very important life skill. And you can translate what you learn about interviewing really to any interpersonal situation where you have dialogue. So I think everyone should practice becoming as strong an interviewer as possible. And some tips are research, research, research. Applicants should research the particular school you're applying to and research your interviewer. Look on LinkedIn, find out a little bit about their background and research yourself. Think about yourself and what aspects specifically of you, your experiences, your interests align with the particular school. Review your application thoroughly so that you remember what you've already submitted, and make sure you respond to the interviewer's questions and send a thank you note after. Often when I'm working on college admissions, families will ask, what are the best colleges for grad school? And truly, the best colleges are the schools where you will thrive and it will bring out your potential. But there are some specifics. So for example, for medical school, look into what opportunities you have to conduct research, have clinical experience. If the school is affiliated with a hospital, that will give you additional exposure to research and shadowing and medical school courses. And it's very important for all kinds of grad school to have access to faculty. When a student comes to me at the end of junior or senior year and they would like to apply for grad school, one of the areas that often they have not considered sufficiently is developing close relationships with a few faculty who could serve as recommenders. And that's also very valuable for your intellectual development, to deal with professors on a very close basis, discuss ideas, work on independent work, research, a senior thesis if that's available. So I can't emphasize enough the value of attending a school where you'll be able to forge very close relationships with faculty. And finally, think of the features that are the best fit for you. Do you want to go to a school that is small or large, near a city, that has vibrant Greek life or athletic spirit, that has a very strong intellectual culture? Think of where you will thrive and grow as a person and as a scholar. And finally, let's look at the application timetable for the different schools. For every graduate school, the earlier the better. Apply as early as is effective for you, because many of the grad schools operate on a rolling basis. So for med school admissions, this year it's opening on May 4th to start filling out your application, and then May 27th to actually submit. And for all the med school applicants I work with, I would like them to submit in the opening half hour of when the application opens, because the next step is your application goes through a transcript verification process, which could take 2 weeks if you submit in early June, and could take 6 weeks if you submit in July. So you need to have your transcript verified, and then the application goes to med schools, you receive secondaries and you work on them, and the protocol is to submit them within 2 weeks. And then as a result of that, you will be invited for interviews. So the earlier you start, the better. And the same with law school, because the law school has different rounds. Some law schools have early decision, like Columbia. And if you submit early, it shows your interest, and then you might receive an interview invitation at an earlier timetable. So my advice is that if you're planning to attend law school directly after college, then you should apply in the fall of senior year if possible, and take the LSAT in June after junior year, and then be working on applications in the summer. And if you're planning to take a gap year, then you could wait to take the LSAT until the year after you graduate. So the timetable is critical. I spend an enormous amount of time with each student I'm working with on grad school, figuring out the best timeline. Will they be positioned to apply to start medical, law, business, or grad school right after college graduation? Or do you need to spend 1 or 2 gap years bolstering your candidacy? Or perhaps you just would like to take a break. But it's very important to try to work backwards to figure out, what do you need to do in terms of coursework, standardized testing, and activities in order to be positioned to apply when you would like. Business schools have between 1 to 4 rounds of applications. And again, it's best to apply as early as possible. So for instance, if you take the GMAT in June, the benefit of taking testing early is that it does indicate the range of schools that you would be admissible to. And then you can work on your resume, essays, all of the other application components, and try to apply to business school in the first round. So there are between 1 to 4 rounds, and it's really on, in a way, a first come, first serve basis. If a business school receives phenomenal applications in rounds 1 and 2, it will have very few spots left in rounds 3 and 4 for the late fall and winter. So now that we have gone through all different components of the graduate school admissions process, we are going to have a question and answer period while Caroline is tabulating and spinning the digital wheel to see who our raffle winner is. So I would like to remind everyone, please enter the drawing if you would like a complimentary 60-minute graduate school consulting session with me. Send a note in the Q&A with your first and last name and your email address. Now, this is different from our half-hour complimentary consultation, in which I do not give customized advice, but we get to know each other and I describe the services and see how we could work together most effectively. The 60-minute is truly to answer any questions you have about the particular graduate school path that you would like to take. So now, Ginger, we turn to you for any questions that have come in.
There are lots. And Julie, you are so generous to be able to share this time with us and your wonderful expert advice. And I hope everyone does take a minute to pop their information and just their first and last name and their email address into the Q&A box so that they can get a chance to enter this raffle. So a couple of questions to get started. I was giggling a little bit when you were speaking about major choices, because when I was in admissions at Duke, there was a little bit of a rivalry among departments, and the art history department bragged that they had 100% success rate for students applying to medical school.
Oh, that is fascinating.
There were 2. I mean, it wasn't in the 5 years that I was working there, but I think to your point about students, being able to explore their passions while they're undergrads, it's really fun and exciting. So I would echo lots of the good advice that you've been giving.
Ginger, I'd like to jump on that point, because I was an undergraduate at Princeton. I majored in developmental psychology, which I absolutely loved. I returned very often, and Princeton publishes a book every year called Major Choices. It's a play on words, and they have 50 alums, and they show their major and their career that seemingly are not related. And one of their big examples is art history and medicine. But everything has applicability. There's a lot of creativity in art, and you need to be creative in diagnosing in medicine. So you can see parallels in everything, and training your mind to think analytically about a subject that you care deeply about is so important.
I could not agree more. Okay, so talking about psychology, can you tell us a little bit more about the differences between psychology programs? I too was a psych major back in the day, and but in a department that was very research oriented and really heavy cog psych. So could you talk about those differences for just a minute, please?
Absolutely. And I think it's really fascinating the different paths that you could take to having a graduate degree in psychology and some of the objectives of studying psychology on the graduate level are to become a therapist or to teach psychology at a university level, or so many other areas in terms of becoming a school psychologist. So the differences are the PhD is the most rigorous, demanding path. And it's usually at least 6 years, and it's heavily research based. So you would take courses for a few years, and then the rest of the time, 3 or 4 years, you would be definitely immersed in a research project. And identifying the professor you want to work with would be a very major component. So a big part of your candidacy would be research you've already conducted in college. If you want to have very similar goals career-wise, but you're not quite as research focused, then the Psy-D degree would be a 5-year program, still doing research, but the balance between clinical work and research would shift a little bit to the clinical side. And then there are many master's degrees. You could get a master's in family counseling and be a therapist, or in organizational development and work in a corporation, or school psychology, or even a master's of social work has a lot of psychology, and you could work for an association, for instance, in helping a family deal with illness or challenges.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I wish my own advisor had been as thorough in explaining the differences.
Thank you very much, Ginger.
So we have a question from an attendee who wonders about what standardized testing you take if you're applying to a joint degree program. So let's say you're interested in doing a joint program with an MBA and a JD. Do you have to do double duty? Do you need to do the GMAT and the LSAT? Which one do you do first? Can you tell us a little bit about that plan?
Absolutely. So every combination program will have a different requirement, and often you will need to take both of those standardized tests. But it really depends. I would check on the requirements of the particular program to see. And one of the benefits of these combined programs is it typically shaves off 1 year. So it'll typically take 1 semester off of the MBA and the JD. The same with MD, MPH, Masters of Public Health. That's another very popular combination. In some cases, you do not need to take an additional test. Like with MD, MPH, it is possible to just take the MCAT for the medical program. And since that is so rigorous and also has analytical reasoning and health oriented, you may not need to also take the GRE. So every combination is different in terms of whether it's required to take both exams. And I would check with the particular program and school.
Thank you. One more question about testing, if you don't mind. You had mentioned that a lot of programs are now providing more flexibility, and more specialized programs are taking the GRE than ever before. So if a student was thinking about going to law school or to business school, would you encourage them to take the specialized test in their field, the LSAT or the GMAT, or would they be all right to just focus on the GRE?
That is a terrific question. And my answer will be very typically, it depends on many different factors. So it depends on how strong of a test taker you are. And it depends how selective the programs are that you're considering. How much time do you have to study? What other activities are competing for your time? So all of those factors. So for instance, if you are not a strong test taker and you feel that a less selective program would suit your needs and you're working full time, then that would absolutely point to a GRE. If you are an extremely strong student and you have very high level ambitions and you want to go to one of the top 5 or 10 business schools or law schools, then I would encourage you to take the specialized test.
Thank you. I think that's good wisdom. I am reminded of a student we were working with at Appleruth just this past year who initially thought that she wanted to look at really top programs. But then when we looked at her scores from both the GMAT and the GRE, and she also acknowledged her own background hadn't been strong, just her own sort of early education hadn't been particularly strong in math and science. She wound up doing much better on the GRE because she could focus on those kind of rebuilding those skills that maybe didn't get good muscles in like back in middle school, and was able to work with our tutor, one of our tutors, really effectively on that. So I guess I will mention here that we do we do help prep students for some of the graduate admission programs on the testing side of things, and we're glad to help and partner with Julie and with others on that if we can and when we can.
Terrific. And Ginger, that is such an excellent point. I always recommend taking a full-length practice test and before you make a decision. I recommend that for the SAT and ACT for college. And then if you could take a full-length LSAT and GRE or GMAT, and it's not only comparing the scores, it's comparing your comfort level with the different tests.
I think that's quite true. I do think it's so important. And Julie, you and I have talked about this before about students making choices, right? You
Yeah.
have choices all the way through about what you want to do and how your journey will evolve. And it's worth kind of exploring and considering all of those things. And one of the things that I've been a little bit worried about in this climate, when we know so many schools have gone test optional, of course, out of necessity during the pandemic, and that puts students in the driver's seat. But I worry a little bit that some students might be avoiding testing because they maybe don't think it's going to be a strong suit for them, might be uncomfortable, might be difficult. And I worry that later when they get to grad school, they might think, oh, maybe I won't do that because I'm not a great test taker. But every student can be a great test taker. They just need more practice.
Right. If they work with an amazing test prep company like Appleruth and also work one-on-one with tutors, I think that's terrific. And a quick word on test optional. Test optional is not test blind. Test blind means the school will not look at scores even if you submit them. Test optional is you have the choice of whether to submit scores, and an applicant who submits high scores will always have the advantage, all things being equal, over an applicant without test scores. So always try to give yourself as much optionality as possible.
Great advice. I think we might have time to squeeze in 2 more questions if you don't mind, Julie.
Yes.
One student is wondering, are extracurricular activities and shadowing and volunteering important if you're applying to a master's program in the sciences?
So I think that the most important aspect applying to masters in the sciences is to have done research undergraduate. That is valued enormously to show the capacity to do research, because that will be a big part of your graduate school, whether it's master's programs or doctorate. So that would be my number one activity that I would suggest, and to take the most challenging courses in the sciences that you can manage and experiment with different areas of science to see what you would like to specialize in.
Thank you. And one more question, if it's okay, Caroline, before we let you spin the wheel. Would you advise that a student take time between college and graduate school, what we sometimes call a gap year, or sometimes a gap period, depending on how long it lasts? Or would you advise students to kind of head straight from undergraduate to graduate programs?
Terrific question. And Ginger, it's also called a glide year.
Oh, I like
Some
that.
people say that there's not a gap because you're doing something productive. So again, it depends on so many different factors, and it depends on whether you have the stamina to go directly to grad school, and also could you boost your candidacy by doing some productive activity during the 1 or 2 gap years. So for instance, for medical school in particular, if your academics are not strong enough when you are graduating college, you could go into a post-bac academic program to get either a certificate or a master's in the medical sciences or biomedical sciences that will be factored into your GPA. And if you need more time to take testing, that's another consideration. If you're applying for business school, the average number of years between college and matriculation is 4 years. When I went to Harvard Business School, students went directly after college. I went 2 years after school. But now business schools very much want applicants to have 3 to 4 years of experience, and they want recommendations from people in the business world that they've worked with. So it absolutely depends on the specifics of the graduate school.
Thank you. All right, Caroline, I think we're ready.
Okay. Well, thank you to everyone who entered into our raffle. I'm going to spin the wheel. And tonight's winner is Crystal. So Crystal, we have your email. We will be emailing you shortly tonight or tomorrow to set up your 1-hour grad school consulting session. So thank you.
Wonderful. I am delighted. Absolutely delighted. This was a pleasure for me as always. Ginger, thank you so much for the opportunity. And at Collegiate Gateway, we have an ongoing series of presentations and workshops about all kinds of graduate school. So please feel free to go on our website and click events, and you can register for as many talks as possible. We love to provide this and share our expertise. And thank you, Ginger, for the opportunity.
Thank you both, Julie and Caroline, for being with us tonight, and congratulations to Crystal. Thank you all so much for being with us, having great questions and engaging with us tonight. You will get this recording and Julie's slides in case there are any notes you might have missed or some tips you want to review. That'll be coming through tomorrow. If Collegiate Gateway can give help to you, I hope you'll reach out to them. If we can help you here at App Ruth with standardized testing, I hope you'll let us know. Whatever it is that your future holds, we wish you all the best of luck with it. There's a wonderful journey ahead for you. Congratulations and good luck. And thank you guys. Good night.
Good night.